So today's focus is how to sublimate an A5 notebook, a faux leather coaster, and a tumbler. I'm going to show you how to wrap your tumbler under the bottom so that it leaves a nice seamless image. You start with your design already prepped and cut on your sublimation paper. You'll notice that the top of my tumbler does not come off of the paper. So the paper exceeds at the top and the bottom. And that extra piece that's on the bottom is where I'll actually wrap in order to make a nice bottom. You also make sure that your the ends of your paper align properly. If you use a seamless tumbler or a seamless image, this will make sure that each side of the image meets in order to create that seamless look. Now you take your tape and you run one strip of tape directly down the middle. You pull your tape and your paper tightly, and you'll notice I'm pulling towards or I'm pulling away from me in order to make sure that I get a nice tight grip. The key to sublimation is to make a really tight grip before you put it in your convection oven. You'll notice here at the top of the tumbler, I smooth down the seam and I place my piece of tape. So I hold my hand there in order to make sure that the paper doesn't move. And you see me pulling the paper back towards me in order to make a nice tight fit. I do the same for the bottom. You don't move the tape all the way down to the bottom of the actual paper because the paper hangs off the tumbler. So just as far as the bottom of the tumbler. I then go and put 2 more strips just in between those for a total of 5 strips just to make sure that I get a nice tight grip. And then I put tape going up the seam. Now this is all heat transfer tape. I do have the thinner tape and you'll see that I use that a little later on in the video, but I've learned that the thicker tape works best. I try not to move the tape too much. You notice the one previously kind of went off the seam, and so I overlapped it there because I don't want to rip the paper. Now this tape that goes down the seam goes all the way to the end, even on the part that's going to wrap to the inside of the cup as well as the bottom. Now you'll notice I am going to take the scissors and slit around the very bottom of the tumbler in order to wrap the tumbler without any gaps. Now, I don't use shrink wrap, but I assume it would be a lot easier with shrink wrap. Now, I have repositionable adhesive spray, which actually you'll notice in a little bit that it has a clog in it. And so at one point it didn't stick. But what I'm doing is I'm pressing the paper. Here's where it didn't spray well. But I'm tightly pressing those little strips of paper over top of each other because it's a round surface, they'll begin to overlap a little bit, which is fine. If it's wrapped nice and tight, you will not be able to tell. But I wrap the entire design. And because it is just adhesive spray and it's repositionable, after it comes out of the convection oven, it will be able to come off. Now you'll notice after I do that, there's one section that I actually oversprayed, and you'll see the pink from the paper kind of bleeding. And you'll see that after it comes out of the convection oven, it's hard to get the paper off of that point, but that's not a problem. I then take my nail and make sure that it's pressed tightly into that seam right there, going in the same direction as the paper so that I'm not lifting up the paper because I mentioned it does overlap. So then here, if I had shrink wrap, there would be no need for this bottom tape. But because I don't use shrink wrap, I tape down the edges. If you had shrink wrap, you could skip this part as far as taping down the edge because it does have a nice stick. But once you put it in the oven, it will come up. So you do need to secure it at some way. Then I have the small section at the top. I like to do the bottom first because it allows me to sit my tumbler directly down. Now for this top rim, I hold one end of the tape. You'll notice I hold one end of the tape with my left thumb and I pull it really tight in order to, and you see it kind of crinkles a little bit, but I pull it really tight so that half of the tape is exposed, and then I push the tape down so that the tape sticks to the inside of the cup. I go back through everything, make sure all of my seams are nice and tight. I then take masking tape. Because I don't use shrink wrap, I do use masking tape. The masking tape does not burn in the convection oven, but I take the masking tape, and you'll notice that the masking tape is also pulled in the same direction that I pulled the tumbler for the sublimation paper. So everything gets pulled in that same direction. So if there's even just the slightest little bit of slack, it will pull it around. I do each strip separately. There are times where I just kind of roll the tape as I'm moving, but because I'm using black, I overlap and make sure that every single part of the tumbler gets the masking tape. Because the black, at some points, if the black doesn't have the same pressure, then the color doesn't come out exactly the same. And it may be the same with all colors, but it's very evident with the color black. I smooth around again, always in the same direction, you'll notice. I also start where the seam is, just on the opposite side of the seam. So just where the left side of the paper from this view, the left side of the paper overlapped a tiny bit, so that everything is pulled in the same exact direction. I put my last strip of tape. Again, now the masking tape does leave a sticky residue, and so I try my best not to get the masking tape on the cup itself. So I keep the masking tape on the paper so that when I remove the paper, that sticky residue is also removed. And I actually try to remove it all at the same time so that the tape stays on the paper when it's removed. I go through everything, I roll, make sure everything is nice and tight. I know this video doesn't show how tight I'm rolling everything, but I go through all parts one last time, including that seam on the very bottom. And then I put it in my convection oven. I do 4 sides, and if you notice, I started with the seam toward me just so that I didn't forget, but I do each side 2 minutes long, and I know that it's ready when you can see the image through it. So this here is the image of the notebook. This is the hardcover notebook. You'll see I have the black spine. I take the hardcover notebook and I align it to the sublimation side. Meaning the middle is not actually the middle because the black spine actually comes towards the middle a little bit. I tape it down to a piece of paper that I just have on the heat press. I take another piece of paper and as my blowout paper, and here I actually had not sized it to the notebook, so I'm actually turning my crank in order to size it. I don't reopen it. So if it's not sized properly, I don't reopen it. I size it as it's going down. I immediately pull off the paper that I used after it's pressed. And then you'll notice I'll turn it over and I will do the bottom at the same exact time. What I just did there was I went to line it up again. So if you look from the front to the back, because this image has a different image kind of through the middle, I wanted to make sure that the 2 middles lined up. Again, I use the same blowout paper and you press it. After it's pressed, again, I immediately pull off the sublimation paper. And now, depending on how hard the pressure was, sometimes the notebook likes to wilt. And so I may put it under a weight while it's still hot just to make sure that it stays flat and it doesn't buckle. So here I'm taking the coaster. I size the coaster first, right side down, and then I turn it around so that the right side of the coaster is up, making sure that I don't move the paper as I move it down. You'll notice here is when I actually switch my tape. I try to use the thinner tape. I try to save the thick tape for the tumbler. Again, you press it for 80 seconds. I pressed the notebook as well as the coaster, both for 80 seconds at 200 degrees Celsius. And the coaster is finished. So again, 200 degrees Celsius for 80 seconds, medium pressure. The tumbler is finished. You'll see the image has gone through. So now what I'm doing, and cooled. I usually like to work with my tumblers that are already cooled. So you'll see that I'm pulling off the paper with the tape so it doesn't leave that sticky residue on the actual paper itself or on the tumbler itself. But the sticky residue is left on the paper, which is what you want. Then you'll notice here, when I told you I oversprayed, a little goes a long way. You'll see where I oversprayed just a bit. I have to use my nail because it did stick. But it's not a big issue. If you have Glue Gun or some other sticky residue remover, it's fine. So here I take the sticker off the rubber bottom and I affix it to the bottom of the tumbler. And I just move around with my hands and it's done. There's no sticky residue. It has a nice finished bottom look. Now, this picture here is an example of two separate notebooks, and I wanted to show the difference. The one on the left is the hardcover book, and the one on the right is the softcover book. They are made of two different materials, so they look a lot different. Here's the bottom view of the tumbler. You'll notice that there are no light spots that represent where the paper overlapped, so they had a nice even pressure, and the texture from the print came out. And then this is what we started with. We have the hardcover sublimated notebook on the left, the sublimated tumbler that wraps to the bottom, as well as the faux leather coaster sublimated. This is what we started with, a blank canvas, the hardcover notebook, and then this is the soft cover notebook. And then this picture here, you'll notice the two different coasters. As I did a couple more, I realized the words were a little smaller than what I liked. And so I just increased the background size so that it was larger. And then don't forget the back. So I usually put a thank you sticker, one just to thank the customer and to kind of help them locate where to open the product at for the notebook and the coaster. And then for the tumbler, I usually put a sticker with my QR code on it, which will lead them to my Instagram page. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below.